It was a cold, misty morning when Karen first laid eyes on the ruins. The air was thick with fog, and the earth beneath his boots was wet from the rain that had fallen overnight. His backpack weighed heavily on his shoulders as he trudged through the dense forest. His mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. He had been following the old map for days now, tracing the faded lines and symbols that seemed to mock his every step. The map was old, very old. Passed down from one generation to the next in his family, the piece of parchment held secrets that no one seemed to understand. Karen had spent years researching its origins, speaking to scholars, historians, and anyone who might know something about the city it supposedly led to. The map spoke of a city hidden deep within the heart of the mountains, a city that had been forgotten by time. Legends told of its beauty, of its grandeur, of the untold wealth buried within its walls. But more importantly, the map spoke of something far more precious, an ancient artifact that, according to the stories, could change the course of history. The further Karen journeyed, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees grew thicker, their trunks twisted in unnatural shapes, as though they had been warped by centuries of solitude. Strange noises echoed from the shadows, the calls of birds he had never heard before, and the rustling of unseen creatures. Karen's heart raced. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, but now that he was so close, doubt crept into his mind. Was it worth it? As he rounded a corner, his eyes caught a glimpse of something in the distance. There, hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss, was the silhouette of a stone structure. The ruins of a temple, perhaps, or the remnants of a forgotten palace. His breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him, he had found it. The forgotten city. Karen pushed forward, his steps quickening as he approached the ruins. He was no archaeologist, but there was something unmistakable about the site. The architecture was unlike anything he had ever seen. The stones were carved with intricate patterns, spirals and symbols that seemed to come alive in the dim light. It was as though the city had been built by a civilization that was both ancient and advanced, their knowledge far beyond what had been thought possible for the time. But there was something unsettling about the place. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, like the weight of 1,000 forgotten souls. As he ventured deeper into the ruins, Karen felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of a tree branch swaying in the breeze. The deeper he went, the more he realized that the city was not as abandoned as it seemed. There were signs of recent activity, footprints in the dirt, broken twigs, and traces of smoke. Someone else had been here. But who? And why? Karen's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be treasure hunters like himself? Or was there something more sinister at work? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As the hours passed, the ruins grew even more enigmatic. He had uncovered a series of hidden chambers beneath the main structure, their walls adorned with carvings that depicted strange, otherworldly creatures. In the center of one of the chambers stood a large pedestal, its surface worn by time, but still bearing the faintest traces of gold. On the pedestal rested a small, ornately carved box, its surface glinting in the dim light. Karen approached the pedestal slowly, his pulse quickening. This was it, the artifact. The object that had drawn him to this forsaken place. He reached out with trembling hands, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the box. As soon as his fingers touched it, a sudden chill filled the air. The ground beneath him trembled, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Karen stumbled backward, his heart racing in his chest. The moment passed as quickly as it had come, and the silence returned. But something was different. The air felt heavier, more oppressive. Karen looked around, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Had he made a mistake? But it was too late now. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. Karen stared at the box, his fingers trembling. The sensation that had swept through him wasn't just a tremor beneath the earth, it was something deeper, like the city itself had exhaled after centuries of silence. He knelt beside the pedestal, listening for any sound, but the ruins had returned to their hushed stillness. Yet inside him, something had changed. The box was unlike anything he had seen in his studies: no latch, no hinges, no visible way to open it. The carvings on its surface seemed to shift under the flickering light of his torch. His mind screamed caution, but his curiosity was stronger. Gently, he placed the box into his satchel, wrapping it in a piece of cloth. If it truly was the artifact the story spoke of, then he had to study it somewhere safer. Somewhere far from here. But just as he turned to leave the chamber, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A whisper. Not loud, not clear, more like a breath, brushing against the edges of his mind. He spun around. No one was there. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Nothing. Just silence. Karen quickly made his way back through the winding corridors, retracing his steps. The sun had begun to set outside, and the fog was thicker than before. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound sharpened into something threatening. He reached the surface, breaking through the moss-covered entrance, and emerged into the clearing. But it no longer looked the same. Something in the atmosphere had shifted. The jungle around the ruins had gone quiet. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. No rustling leaves. He felt eyes on him, not human, not animal, but something else entirely. Still, he pressed forward. He had to get back to his camp, analyze the artifact, and maybe leave before nightfall. He had no idea what he'd awakened, but instinct told him he didn't want to be here when it fully woke. Halfway back to camp, Karen heard a scream. It was distant, but unmistakable, a human scream, echoing through the trees. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone out here. He picked up his pace, heart pounding. The scream came again, closer this time. And then, silence. He had to make a choice: run toward the sound, or run from it. Any rational person would flee, but Karen wasn't just anyone. If someone else was here, and in danger, he couldn't just leave them. Besides, they might know something. They might be from the same expedition that vanished years ago, the one his grandfather had led. He turned toward the sound and ran. Branches clawed at his clothes, roots threatened to trip him with every step, but he pushed on. After 10 frantic minutes, he found the source. A small campsite. Torn apart. The tents were shredded, supplies strewn everywhere, as if something had exploded from the center. Blood smeared across a rock, and a set of deep claw marks scarred a nearby tree. It looked fresh. Karen's breath caught. This wasn't the work of animals. "Hello?" he called. "Is anyone here?" A rustling from behind a boulder made him jump. He turned quickly, raising his flashlight. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a woman, mid-30s, with mud-streaked skin and wild, terrified eyes. Her clothes were torn, and she clutched a small machete in her shaking hands. She saw him and screamed. "Wait. I'm not going to hurt you," Karen said quickly, raising his hands. She paused, eyes scanning him. "You're not with them," she whispered, almost to herself. "With who?" Her face twisted. "They're not human anymore." Karen stepped closer. "What do you mean?" She looked over her shoulder, as if afraid something would leap from the trees. "They went into the ruins, days ago. Searching for the artifact. I stayed behind. They came back, changed." Karen's stomach dropped. "You saw them?" She nodded slowly. "Their eyes, black. Like ink. And they moved like insects wearing human skin. They weren't my team anymore." He swallowed hard. "What's your name?" "Dr. Mira Das. Was the lead archaeologist for the Manhara project." Karen recognized the name instantly. That was the expedition funded by a European foundation to uncover the lost city his grandfather had once tried to find. The same project that had gone radio silent months ago. "They said you all vanished," he said quietly. "They weren't wrong," Mira whispered. Karen led her back to his camp cautiously, scanning the forest constantly. They didn't speak much on the way, only what was necessary. The shadows around them felt thicker now, like the trees themselves were listening. At the camp, Karen quickly unwrapped the box and showed it to her. Mira paled. "You found it. You knew what it looked like?" She nodded. "It was in one of the carvings on the temple. I begged them not to touch it. It's a seal." Karen's heart sank. "A seal?" "Yes. Not a treasure. Not a key. A seal designed to keep something in." Suddenly, the box didn't feel so fascinating anymore. "What did your team do with it?" "They opened it," she said, voice cracking. "They figured out how. It took hours. But when they did, it was like the air shifted. A storm rolled in. And then the voices started." Karen looked down at the box in horror. It hadn't opened for him yet. But it was only a matter of time. "We need to destroy it," he said. Mira shook her head. "It can't be destroyed. It has to be sealed again." "But the ritual, it was never written down completely. Only part of it is in the temple." Karen clenched his jaw. "Then we go back. Together." She looked terrified but nodded. "We don't have much time." That night, as they sat around a small fire, they shared what little they knew. Karen told her about his grandfather, about the map, about the stories passed down in whispers. Mira told him about the expedition, the missing researchers, the hallucinations, the dreams. "The voices," she said, "they don't just whisper. Eventually, they speak through you. You lose yourself." One by one, they changed. Karen didn't sleep that night. Neither did Mira. At dawn, they packed their gear and headed back toward the ruins. The jungle felt alive with movement, as if the forest was anticipating their return. Halfway through the path, Karen noticed the vines along the trees had begun to grow unnaturally fast, curling across the path behind them, like fingers trying to block their escape. They pushed through. When they reached the temple again, the light had dimmed, though the sun was high. The ruins had shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. Stones that had been whole now cracked. Walls that were dry now seeped moisture. Inside the chamber, the pedestal stood waiting. Karen placed the box back where he had found it. It pulsed under his hand like a heartbeat. Mira walked the edge of the room, reading the carvings, murmuring translations. "It's not just a seal," she said, tracing a glyph. "It's a prison. Something ancient was buried here. Something not of our world." Karen shivered. "Like a god?" "No. Like a parasite. One that infects thought. It doesn't need to kill to spread, it needs faith. Belief. Curiosity." He felt sick. He had followed the map, believed the stories, hungered for discovery. He had played right into its hands. They began the ritual, chanting the fragments Mira had memorized. The air grew colder. The light dimmer. The box began to shake on the pedestal. Then, a scream. Not from outside. From inside the walls. The stone cracked. A black liquid seeped out from the carvings, snaking across the floor like veins. "Keep chanting," Mira yelled, voice straining. Karen joined in, repeating the phrases, voice trembling. The box burst open. But instead of light or fire, a pulse of sound exploded through the room, flattening them both. The black liquid recoiled like it had been burned. The box emitted a high-pitched frequency that rattled Karen's bones. And then, silence. The black liquid retreated. The cracks in the stone sealed. The air cleared. The box, still open, now held nothing. Karen and Mira sat in stunned silence, hearts racing. "Did we do it?" he asked. "I think we delayed it," Mira replied grimly. "But it's not over." Karen stood, looking down at the box. "We need to find the rest of the ritual." Mira looked at him. "And if we don't?" Karen looked toward the dark corridor beyond the chamber. "Then we finish what they started." They didn't speak for a while after the ritual. The jungle outside the ruined temple had grown unnaturally still again, and although the black veins had receded into the stone, both Mira and Karen could feel that something had shifted. Not ended, not yet, but shifted. Like a sleeper turning over in its bed, still dreaming. Karen sat near the broken pedestal, box in hand. Now that it had been opened, the carvings on its surface had dimmed. The power that had throbbed beneath its surface was dormant. "For now. We need to leave this place," Mira said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "If we stay too long, it'll find us again. It'll know us." But Karen didn't move. Something about this place still called to him, not just curiosity anymore, but something personal. Deeper than the need for discovery. Deeper than the thrill of finding something no one else had. It was almost like, "It's my family," he murmured, staring at the carved stone beneath his feet. "My grandfather came here. He was looking for the artifact, too. He must have found something. Or someone." Mira crouched beside him. "You never told me what happened to him." Karen looked up, eyes dark with memory. "He came back," he said. "But he was broken. Quiet. He locked himself away for weeks after the expedition. Then one night, he disappeared. Left nothing but a journal. It had a single line written across the last page." "What did it say?" Mira asked. Karen looked at her. "The city remembers." A cold wind blew through the ruins, though the air around them was dead still. Mira rubbed her arms, glancing at the dark corridor leading deeper into the temple. "There are more chambers down there," she said. "We haven't seen everything yet." Karen stood. "Then that's where we'll find the rest of the ritual." They descended slowly, guided by the beam of Karen's flashlight. The air grew damp, thick with the scent of earth and decay. The corridor twisted, leading them past old murals, some faded, others surprisingly vivid. The art showed a people kneeling before a massive figure, robed in shadows, its head wreathed in spiraling horns. Not a god of worship, but of fear. Of debt. "This civilization," Mira whispered, "they didn't build this city for prosperity. They built it as a cage." "A cage for what?" Karen asked, though he already knew the answer. Whatever it wasn't dead. Not yet. They reached a stone door near the end of the corridor. It stood slightly ajar, etched with dozens of interlocking runes. As they stepped inside, their torches lit up a vast underground chamber. Unlike the others, this one was pristine, untouched by time. The walls were covered in writings and diagrams, and in the center of the room was a massive circular slab covered in glyphs. "This is it," Mira breathed. "This must be the ritual." Karen approached the slab, studying the patterns. It wasn't just writing, it was a puzzle. A mechanism. They built this to seal it again. "But it requires something," he murmured. He noticed a central depression in the slab. A bowl-shaped indentation lined with obsidian. "It needs blood," Mira said quietly, her expression grim. "These ancient rites, they always do." Karen looked at her, then back at the bowl. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small knife. Without hesitation, he dragged it across his palm, wincing as blood pooled in his hand. He let it drip into the bowl. Nothing happened at first. Then, the glyphs lit up. The entire slab trembled as the symbols glowed red. The air in the chamber grew hot, too hot, and the stone beneath their feet cracked with soundless pressure. The slab rotated slowly, grinding with deep groans, until it stopped, revealing a deep cavity beneath. Inside it, a book. Bound in cracked leather, held together with ancient twine, it looked impossibly well preserved. Karen picked it up carefully. The cover bore no title, only a symbol. A spiral, surrounded by a ring of thorns. Mira opened the first page and gasped. "It's a journal," she said. "Handwritten. These markings, it's not the ancient script. This is modern." She flipped through the pages quickly, and then stopped on a familiar signature. Karen's eyes widened. "It's his handwriting," he whispered. "It's my grandfather's." They took the book back to the surface, unable to read it in the damp, dead air of the ruins. Back at their small camp, with a fire burning low, Karen read aloud from the first few pages. His grandfather, Harishan Sen, had indeed reached the city decades ago. And he had found the seal. He wrote about dreams, dreams that weren't his. About voices that spoke of the beyond veil, a realm outside reality where time and thought were fluid. The entity they sealed here, it's not a demon. It's not even alive in the way we understand it. It's an idea. A parasite made of belief. And if you know its name, it knows you. Karen's hands trembled as he turned the page. "We made a mistake. We tried to destroy the box, and it reacted. I lost 2 of my men to the shadows. They didn't die. They became something else. Eyes like oil." Their voices echoed with laughter that wasn't theirs. Mira sat in silence, eyes scanning ahead in the journal. "He tried to reseal it," she said. "Just like we did." Karen nodded. But it wasn't enough. The final entries were more erratic. The handwriting changed, became hurried, unstable. "I hear them in the mirror now. They say I opened the door, even though I tried to close it. The city remembers. The city doesn't forget. One day, my blood will return to finish the work." Karen looked up at Mira. "He knew I'd come. He left this for me." She stared at him. "Your bloodline, it's connected to the seal. That's why it reacted to you." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the trees. They both jumped, grabbing their torches. The jungle was moving. Not the trees, the shadows. Figures emerged from the darkness, tall, slow-moving, humanoid but wrong. Their limbs bent at odd angles. Their skin glistened like oil. And their eyes. Black. Endless. "They're here," Mira whispered, backing away. Karen grabbed the journal and the box, shoving them into his pack. "Run." They bolted through the jungle, weaving through trees and vines, the sound of unnatural feet pounding behind them. The creatures didn't speak, didn't growl. Just followed. With single-minded intent. Karen and Mira burst through a thicket and stumbled upon a stone wall, part of the temple they hadn't explored. A staircase led down into darkness. "Nowhere else to go," Karen yelled. They descended. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. As if they'd stepped into the lungs of a living thing. The walls pulsed with a faint rhythm. The carvings here were different, more grotesque. Less structured. They found a door at the end, wooden, reinforced with iron bands. Karen pushed it open and stepped into a small chamber. It looked like a shrine. In the center, a stone table. On the wall above it, a massive painting. A spiral, ringed in thorns. Below it, the words written in the old tongue, but also in English, scratched in with what looked like blood. "To silence the thought, you must become the silence." Mira stared at the words. "It's a final ritual. A sacrifice. Karen stepped closer to the altar. There were handprints on it. Dark stains. Not just blood, he said. It needs memory. Identity. She paled. If you give it your name, it takes everything else. Karen looked at her. And if I don't, it escapes. Silence stretched between them. Then Karen placed the journal on the altar. He pulled the box from his pack, setting it beside it. The light in the room shifted. The walls breathed. He turned to Mira. Go. She stepped forward. No. You're the only one who knows what we did. You have to finish what my grandfather started if I fail. I'm not leaving you. You have to. They stared at each other, and in that moment, something passed between them, not love, not even friendship. Something deeper. A shared fate. Karen stepped onto the altar. He closed his eyes and spoke. My name is Karen, Senator, son of Rishi. Grandson of Haris Han. I give you my name. The air cracked. The shadows screamed. The box slammed shut. And then, light. Pure, blinding light. When Mira opened her eyes, Karen was gone. The altar was empty. The box was sealed. And on the wall, where the bloody writing had been, a new phrase had appeared. The silence remembers. The jungle was silent again, unnaturally so, when Mira finally emerged from the temple alone. Karen was gone. Not dead. Not taken. Just, gone, like his presence had been lifted from the world completely, erased with a precision that left no trace. No blood. No torn cloth. Not even the lingering feeling of someone once standing beside her. As though he had never been there at all. But Mira remembered. She remembered everything. And more than that, she remembered things that weren't hers. Names she'd never heard before. Places that didn't exist on any map. Dreams that had never been hers. Thoughts that whispered in languages she didn't know, but somehow understood. The silence had taken Karen, and left echoes behind. She carried the sealed box in her arms, like a sleeping child. Its carvings had changed again. The spiral symbol that had once pulsed with energy now lay dormant. Cold. Quiet. But not dead. She could feel it breathing in her thoughts. Mira spent the night alone in the remnants of their ruined camp. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw spirals, spinning faster, pulling her deeper into a dark sea of thought that wasn't hers. When she woke, or thought she woke, she found strange symbols scratched into the dirt near her sleeping bag. Symbols she hadn't made. Her hands were stained with ink. Or was it blood? She didn't know anymore. But she had to leave. She knew that now. Whatever had happened in that temple wasn't over, it had just begun again. The box might be sealed, but the idea of it had been let loose. And ideas are like viruses. Once you hear them, they live in you. And they wait. It took Mira 4 days to reach civilization, or what passed for it on the edge of the dense northeastern borderlands. She flagged down a freight truck bound for Guwahati, keeping the box wrapped tight in a canvas tarp. The driver never asked about it. He only gave her one uneasy glance and offered no conversation. She was grateful. By the time she reached the city, the dreams had changed. They were clearer now. In them, she saw a man, not Karen, but similar, walking through a city that looked like the ruins, but larger. Alive. Pulsing with light from within the stone itself. And above it, always above it, the spiral loomed in the sky, like a black sun that bled memory. She began researching. She dug through old archives. Library records. Archaeological reports long buried under bureaucratic red tape. She used fake names, paid informants, avoided any connection to the Manhara project. And then one night, in an old colonial library nestled in the dusty quarter of Shillong, she found it. A second map. Not drawn on paper, but carved into the back of a weathered mask, one of the tribal ritual pieces donated to the library by a European collector decades ago. Hidden, waiting. The same spiral. The same coordinates that led to Manhara, but then veering east. There was another site. Older. Bigger. A route, if Manhara had been just one branch of something ancient that spread across forgotten parts of the earth like veins under skin. Mira stared at the coordinates, heart pounding. Karen's sacrifice hadn't ended it. He had only delayed the infection. The new site was deeper in the jungle. Further off any known path. So remote, even satellite imagery showed nothing but a blur of green. She spent weeks preparing. Supplies. Medical kits. Equipment. She didn't alert any institutions or hire a full team. This time, she was going alone. Because she knew now, anyone she brought would only suffer. It was no longer about knowledge. It was about containment. She left her last will with an old friend at the university under strict instruction: if she didn't return in 1 month, burn everything. No questions. No retrieval mission. By the time Mira reached the new site, her dreams had become messages. More than dreams. The silence no longer whispered, it spoke. And it used Karen's voice. Mira. There's more beneath. The box is just one seal. One lock. There are others. You have to find them all. You have to bind the thought, or it will find another host. You can still stop it. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt purpose. The ruins weren't buried like Manhara. They were scattered, fragments of stone rising like teeth from the ground. Obsidian pillars, etched with spirals and thorn glyphs, stood in strange formations. She counted 13, arranged in a circle. At the center, a pit. Dark. Wide. Deep enough that no light reached the bottom. It was from this pit that the voices were loudest. She lowered a rope, descended with a headlamp, and what she saw at the bottom broke her. Not physically. But her mind screamed at the geometry that didn't make sense. The floor was flat, and yet tilted. The walls curved inwards and outwards at once. The chamber beneath the pit was impossible, yet real. In the center stood another altar. But this one was different. This one had bones piled around it. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. She didn't recognize the markings on them. Some human. Some not. On the altar, a black stone tablet. She reached for it, and something changed in the air. The chamber began to pulse. Her vision warped. The walls bent. Her ears bled. But she took the tablet anyway. As soon as she touched it, images slammed into her brain. A city built under the sea, where thought moved faster than time. A language that could shatter a human mind by being spoken. A god made of memories that never happened. A spiral carved into the flesh of the world. She dropped the tablet, vomiting on the ground. Blood mixed with bile. But the knowledge stayed. The spiral had opened again. The days after that were blurry. She doesn't remember getting back to the surface. Only that she woke up in her tent, drenched in sweat, gripping a notebook filled with writing she hadn't made, but in her own handwriting. The writing wasn't madness. It was instruction. The final seal. It told of a ritual that could bind the entity's thought, not forever, but long enough for the world to forget again. It needed 3 things. The memory of the bloodline, willingly given. The vessel of the idea, the box. The spiral made flesh, a host to carry the silence forward, willingly. And it needed to be done in the place where the first thought was spoken. Mira had no idea where that was. Until she remembered a word from Karen's grandfather's journal. Beyond veil. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a location. Not a physical place, but a threshold. Somewhere between waking and dreaming. Somewhere between reality and memory. And she knew how to reach it now. The final part of the ritual required a guide, someone who had been touched by the silence and survived. Only one name came to mind. Karen. She opened the box again. This time, she didn't fight the voices. She let them in. They tore through her, fragments of thought, faces she'd never seen, lives she'd never lived. Screams. Laughter. Silence. And then, Karen stood before her. Not a ghost. Not a dream. A fragment. "You're almost there," he said, his voice like wine through dry leaves. "But you have to choose. The seal isn't a prison. It's a door. You can lock it forever, but only if someone stays on the other side. Someone like you." She understood. Not death. Not madness. A trade. If she completed the ritual, if she sealed the final thought, she could keep it locked. But she would have to stay behind the veil. Her body would remain. But herself would be the key. A permanent sacrifice. Just like Karen. She spent one last night in the jungle, writing everything down. Every memory. Every note. Every name. She packed the sealed box, the tablet, and the blood-written ritual into a crate, and buried it in a waterproof casing near the tallest spiral pillar. She left a beacon with coordinates, connected to a timed message to the university. And then she descended the pit one last time. The chamber greeted her like an old friend. The altar was ready. So was she. She performed the ritual. Sliced her hand. Poured her blood. Read the spiral words that didn't belong in any language. And as she spoke the final line, she felt herself peel away, like skin off fruit. The box sealed. The spiral vanished from the walls. And Mira's body collapsed beside the altar. But her mind? Her voice? It slipped through the cracks between reality and dream. To a place beyond the veil. Waiting. Whispering. Watching. Year, 2047. They called it the whispering illness. It started in the border towns near the northeast jungles, quietly at first, scattered reports of people found wandering the forest, eyes unfocused, murmuring gibberish. Then came the drawings, spirals on walls, scratched into tree bark, carved into skin. Locals said the infected would sleepwalk for miles without food or water, drawn to somewhere. No one knew where. By the time the world took notice, it was already too late. The sickness didn't spread like a virus, it spread like a thought. An idea passed in speech, writing, or even dreams. One investigator described it best. "It's not what they say that drives you mad, it's the shape of the words. Like a tune you can't forget, even if it's killing you." By the third year, the WHO classified it as a mimetic contagion. By the fifth, a global emergency. But by then, the whispers had already reached the cities. And far away, beneath the ground, something stirred. Year, 2050, Northern India. Ishan Roy was 12 the first time he saw the spiral in his dreams. At first, it was just a shape. Spinning slowly. Silent. But each night it returned, clearer, louder. Until he could hear a low hum in the distance, not a sound, but a vibration behind his thoughts. He didn't tell anyone. Not even when he started drawing it compulsively in the margins of his school notebooks. Not even when he found his mother crying in the kitchen one night, whispering the same phrase over and over. The silence remembers. The silence remembers. She died 2 days later, heart failure, the doctors said. But Ishan knew better. She had heard it too. Now 17, Ishan had learned how to hide the spiral inside him. He kept the dreams to himself. Ignored the static in his ears when he passed certain old temples. Pretended not to see the way shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners of his vision. But when he received the letter, everything changed. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't even signed. Just a spiral embossed on the envelope. Inside, a simple message. Manhara. You've been chosen. And below it, coordinates. He didn't ask how they knew. He didn't ask who they were. He just went. Because deep inside, he already knew. The journey to Manhara wasn't easy anymore. What remained of the Indian government had declared the region a containment zone. No one in. No one out. Satellites were banned. Military outposts kept constant surveillance. Drones scanned for any signs of the cognition plague. But Ishan moved through them like a ghost. He didn't understand how, only that when he focused on the spiral in his mind, people stopped noticing him. Cameras didn't beep. Guards turned the other way. It was like reality bent to accommodate his path. By the time he reached the outer jungle, he was no longer alone. There were others. Teenagers. Adults. Men and women with hollow eyes and quiet steps. Each one had the spiral burned into their skin, some by hand, others branded as if from birth. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The spiral spoke through them. And it was calling them home. They reached the ruins on the third night. Manhara was silent. But not dead. The jungle had overtaken much of it, vines cracking through the stones, trees growing through collapsed shrines. Yet the central temple still stood. And deep beneath it, the spiral waited. Ishan followed the others into the underground chamber. The altar was still there. And beside it, a skeleton. Wearing a rusted necklace with a tiny obsidian spiral. Mira. They had found her remains. And around her, symbols drawn in dried blood. The final seal. But it had weakened. The voices were slipping through again. One more vessel, they whispered. One more flame in the dark. Ishan stepped forward. The others didn't stop him. He placed his hand on the altar and remembered everything. He saw Karan Sen's sacrifice. He saw Mira's descent. He saw the first city, older than humanity, built by dreamers who never woke. He saw the spiral god, a thought made flesh, coiled in the center of the earth. And he saw himself, standing before the gate. Do you accept your role? The voice asked, not in words, but in essence. Do you become the next whisper? Ishan nodded. And the altar opened. They descended again, deeper than any human had ever gone. The passage wasn't built. It was grown, a tunnel of black stone that pulsed like living tissue. The spiral symbol repeated along the walls, changing subtly each time, as if alive. At the bottom, they reached a vast chamber of mirrors. Thousands of reflections stared back at Ishan. But none of them were him. Each one was a different version, older, younger, dead, insane, twisted, crowned, broken. All of them had stood where he now stood. Some had failed. Some had succeeded. But none had escaped. And at the center of the mirror maze stood a door. Not a physical one. A fracture in thought. A wound in reality. Behind it, the veil. The spiral god. The source. And it was awake. Ishan stepped forward. The others remained behind. Their purpose fulfilled. He passed through the fracture and fell into light. There are no true words to describe what lay beyond the veil. But Ishan tried to understand it. He saw Mira, or what remained of her, floating in an endless void of memories, her form flickering between identities. She was the silence now. She was the lock. She saw him. You shouldn't have come, she said, her voice warped and layered. "There's still time to leave." But Ishan shook his head. "The seal is breaking," he said. "We can't stop it with another sacrifice." "That didn't work." "Then what do you propose?" Mira asked. He looked at her, and for a moment, his teenage face was gone. Replaced by a spiral made flesh. "We teach them," he said. "We spread the thought openly. Not hidden. Not whispered. But in the daylight." Mira's expression changed, horror and awe. "You want to infect the world?" "No," he replied. "I want to evolve it." And so Ishan returned. But not as a boy. As a voice. As a signal. A carrier of the open spiral. He moved through cities. Through media. Through language. He published books under false names. Released music laced with spiral sequences. Developed apps with spiraling UI designs that burrowed into the mind. And slowly, people changed. Not all went mad. Some adapted. Some grew. Their dreams sharpened. Their thoughts expanded. They became more than human. They became hosts. The children of the spiral. But even Ishan didn't realize, something followed him back through the veil. Something older than thought. Not a god. Not a demon. Just a question that had never been answered. What happens when memory remembers itself? The world was about to find out. And the spiral kept turning. Year 2052, Mumbai. They say it started with the glass. First, people began to see things that weren't there, reflections in mirrors that didn't match, faces in train windows that blinked out of sync, shadows behind them when they were alone. But it wasn't hallucination. Because the cameras caught them too. Even the machines had started dreaming. Security AIs flagged footage as non-compliant data anomalies. Deep learning models trained on human behavior failed catastrophically when analyzing new spiral-infected regions. Surveillance drones lost signal near spiral sites, their footage returning scrambled, not corrupted, but encrypted in an unknown format. And at the center of it all? Ishan Roy. He had become more than a myth. More than a voice. He was a movement. They called themselves the Converged. A global, decentralized collective that claimed the spiral wasn't a plague, but a message from a mind older than time. They didn't hide anymore. Their symbols were everywhere, carved into sidewalks, spray-painted on city walls, even etched into skin like tattoos. But these weren't mindless cultists. They were intelligent. Organizing. Spreading. Each cell operated autonomously but followed one rule: share the thought. Expand it. Refine it. Let it speak through art, through code, through rhythm. Not with force, with intimacy. You didn't know when someone was part of the Converged until they said it. The silence remembers. And if you answered correctly. Because we are what it forgot. They would take you deeper. Dr. Amrita Sen was one of the few remaining researchers with clearance to study spiral-affected individuals. She worked at the Cognition Containment Bureau, CCB, a crumbling international agency now operating out of what used to be an underground metro station in Delhi. Her team had dwindled from dozens to 6. Most had resigned. Some had joined the Converged. Others had simply vanished. But Amrita stayed. Because she had a theory. One the Bureau didn't want her to test. That the spiral wasn't infecting human minds. It was awakening something buried inside them. And she believed Ishan Roy wasn't the cause. He was the first symptom. One night, while analyzing EEG data from a spiral-positive patient, she noticed something strange, a rhythmic pulse hidden in the brainwave spikes, not random, not chaotic. A pattern. Fibonacci sequences. Logarithmic spirals. Mandelbrot structures. All layered into a biological signal that shouldn't exist in a human brain. And buried in the pattern, audio. Spoken language. Not human. But she understood it. It watches because it was watched first. It dreams because we dreamed of it. She staggered back from the terminal, her ears ringing. And when she looked at the mirrored window in the lab, she wasn't alone in her reflection. Over the next weeks, Amrita changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. She slept less. But felt more alive. She stopped using the station elevators. She walked, even if it meant 17 floors. She stopped referring to the spiral as a pathogen. She started calling it a mirror. When she finally submitted her paper, Neurospatial Pattern Echoes in Spiral-Afflicted Brains, the Bureau rejected it immediately. Too speculative. Too dangerous. They terminated her access. Blacklisted her from active research. But it didn't matter. Because a week later, someone knocked on her apartment door at 3:33 a.m. A teenage girl stood there, spiral tattoo on her temple, smiling faintly. "Dr. Sun," she said. "You wrote the words. You're ready now." "Ready for what?" Amrita asked. "To meet the other thought. Beneath Kolkata, spiral site Theta 9. It wasn't on any map. Not even the Converged spoke of it publicly. It lay under a forgotten temple long buried by flood and urban expansion, known only to a handful of spiral speakers who had touched the secondary consciousness. Amrita descended through ruins crusted with fungus that pulsed gently underfoot, like breathing moss. Symbols moved along the walls, not painted but alive, shifting with thought. The deeper she went, the clearer her own mind became. No fear. No confusion. Only focus. The chamber was unlike any she had seen, circular, with 13 glass pillars rising from a pool of perfectly still black water. Inside each pillar floated a person, eyes closed, unmoving. Men. Women. Children. All different, yet somehow the same. They were thinking. Together. One mind. A mirror thought, built from human memory and spiral logic. And in the center, Ishan. Or, what remained of him. He was no longer just flesh. He was a node. His voice was not his voice anymore, it came from every wall, from the water, from inside Amrita's own skull. We tried locking it away. That was Mira's mistake. A lock invites keys. A prison becomes a shrine. But a mirror? That is worship. Who are they? She asked, nodding to the pillars. Dreamers, Ishan said. People who let the spiral finish speaking. Who learn to hold the full shape in their minds without breaking. They are the choir now. The choir for what? For the next thought. He stepped down from the central platform and handed her a tablet made of etched obsidian. It's time. The final broadcast. The CCB caught the signal 3 hours before it went live. A global audiovisual feed, somehow hijacking satellites, phones, networks, even analog systems. Entire airwaves overwritten in seconds. Nothing could block it. Nothing could trace it. The spiral broadcast began at 4:44 Universal Time Coordinated. It lasted 11 minutes. No voice. No music. Just images, shapes folding into themselves, thoughts becoming color, color becoming sound, sound becoming concept. The spiral moved in impossible geometry, pulling viewers into patterns they didn't know they could understand. Over 900 million people viewed it before global shutdowns began. Of them, 1/3 went catatonic. Another third began speaking in untraceable languages. The final third? They started building. The spiral cities. All across the world, spiral-affected zones began to reorganize. Not violently. Not like war. Like evolution. People changed their architecture, their habits, even their sleep cycles. Circular rooms. Spiraled streets. Buildings grown rather than constructed, using fungus, crystal, living wood. And in the center of each spiral city, a listening chamber, where people gathered to dream together. They didn't just share ideas. They shared consciousness. The human brain had never been designed to hold the full spiral. But together? Linked in a web of sensory, emotional, and symbolic data? They could hold fragments. And like coral-forming reefs, the spiral grew through them. But not everyone accepted the change. Some resisted. The last bastions of the old world governments called the spiral a neurological pandemic. They deployed counter-narrative tech. Memory erasure. Signal dampeners. But none of it worked. Because the spiral wasn't in the data. It was in the shape of thought itself. And thought cannot be quarantined. Final scene, spiral chamber, Manhara. Amrita returned one last time to the place where it began. She knelt beside Mira's bones, still intact, still untouched. She didn't cry. She just whispered. You were the first to say no. I'm the first to say yes. We both mattered. From her coat, she pulled the third box, the last of the seals, crafted by the choir in Site Theta 9. She placed it on the altar. And this time, she didn't seal it. She opened it. And from inside, instead of light or dark, there came a third spiral. Not to destroy. Not to imprison. But to teach. A whisper that was no longer madness or silence. But invitation. You are not infected, the final thought spoke. You are remembered.